The NASCAR Xfinity Series hosted a Demolition Derby on Saturday at Martinsville Speedway, and we sat through all of that for an Austin Hill win. Plus, should there be penalties for avoidable contact at short track? Welcome back to Break Hard. I'm Matt. If you sat through all of the Demolition Derby that masqueraded itself as a NASCAR Xfinity Series race on Saturday, well, Godspeed to you, because I did as well. In 14 cautions, 104 caution laps later, and a 250-lap race, we sat through all of that for an Austin Hill win. This race actually didn't start out that bad, and then it quickly devolved itself from man back down into Neanderthal, where typically we go from Neanderthal to man, not on Saturday at Martinsville, Virginia, and we went backwards in time. Because as this race progressed, it just got so much worse, and you're like, it can't get any worse than this. And then on the last lap, it got way worse than that. It started off with Connor Zilisch looking like the dominant car. That 88 car from Junior Motorsports was the class of the field. Win stage 1, win stage 2, leads the most laps, had over 100 laps led, and then ultimately gets back in traffic on different strategy, beats up his own car to his, that was his fault, and then gets caught up in other incidents. And by the end of the day, his car was just completely beat and didn't have a chance. Ends up finishing 28th on the day. But as the race kept going, you kept seeing guys taking more risk and driving into each other a little bit harder, and a little bit harder until ultimately in the final, 100 laps of this race, it just completely lost its mind. You had guys just absolutely driving through each other. Austin Hill St. Mayor might have to go down to the local police station and register themselves as weapons, because that's what they were on Saturday. They were running into anybody and everybody. Austin Hill wrecked his own teammate and eventually goes on to win. He's like, yeah, I got to apologize to the teammate for that one. How many times does this apology happen, or it just continues to not hold any weight for anybody out there? Mayor, at one point, drove through Christian Eckes like he was on a Christian crusade and just turned the 16 in the backstretch and caught Daniel Dye. Dye ramped off of the 16 of his teammate Eckes, got as much air as like a Factor X ramp, gives a suburban kid. And ultimately, it's like, for what? What are we even doing here? The 41, that wasn't the only incident he had on Saturday night. Then you have Sammy Smith, who, by all accounts, was just running into everybody as well. Those were probably your three main culprits on Saturday night. But not to be outdone, there were still others that were just running into one another just because they could. They had bumpers on their cars. Harrison Burton, he got used up like he was the 2024 Chicago White Sox. That guy just got beat all over this racetrack. He lost his mind on the radio at one point, nearly went full Alec Baldwin leaving voicemail. Thankfully, he didn't go full Mel Gibson. That would have been really bad. But overall, I've never seen Harrison Burton get that animated before, and it's because it's just frustrating that you continue to watch these guys just run into each other with zero consequences. And we'll get to that in a little later. But you just had guys continually running into the car in front of them, and it's really frustrating to watch because it's not racing. There's a difference between the dump and run and a bump and run. Remember Gordon on Rusty Wallace 2002 Bristol night race? That's a bump and run. That's executed really, really well. Carl Edwards, 2016 Richmond, executed really, really well. Just a bump. You don't wreck the guy. He still manages to finish second. You go on to lead. That's the epitome of short track racing. That is what short track racing has been about forever. And there's a skill in that. Not in the Xfinity Series. The Xfinity Series is all about just running into the guy in front of you as hard as you can, and then afterwards being like, I did what I had to do. And that's what Austin Hill said. Now, let's go to the last lap. So this race was always going to go to a green-white checker. There was no way in hell this was not going to go to green-white checker. It would have been the easiest money to make if they would let you bet on it. Because, like I said, it just devolved so fast. So it looked like your winner was either going to be Taylor Gray or Sammy Smith. And on the ensuing restart before the GWC, you had Sammy Smith move the 54 of Taylor Gray out of the way. He goes on to take the lead. Okay, not the most egregious thing I've ever seen. I can live with that. On the ensuing restart on the green-white checker, Taylor Gray does the same thing to Sammy Smith. He lines up behind him, moves him up out of the groove, takes the lead. All right. We're eye for an eye now, right? Like you got me, I got you back. We're good. Now, wrong. Last lap going into turn 3, Sammy Smith just drives into the back of the 54 like, well, he was the old driver of the 54, Ty Gibbs, when he did that to his teammate Brandon Jones and absolutely junked him and went on to win. In this situation, Sammy Smith doesn't go on to win because behind him, Austin Hill, who crossed the white, took the checker or the white flag rather, in 5th place. He runs into the 7 car, he runs into the 8, and causes all of them to get out of the way, and then he scoots by to win the race. 5th to 1st in that final corner there, and he didn't even have to do a Ross Chastain to gain these spots. He just drove through the cars in front of him. He goes on to win the race. Big wreck happening at the end there. Daniel Dye smashes the wall coming to the start-finish line, finishes P7. Here's how dumb this race was. Chris Wright got a top 10 finish out of the day. That's how dumb this race was. And hey, I'm the biggest hater of Chris Wright at times. Put himself in position. Hey, good for him. Stayed on the lead lap, put himself in position to capitalize when it mattered. Don't have anything bad to say about that. He did his job on Saturday and wasn't actually one of the people running in to cause all these incidents. So tip of the hat to Chris Wright, something I didn't think I would ever say, but here we are because that's how crazy this race was, and not crazy in a good way, crazy in an embarrassing way, where you're watching this just going, what are we even doing right now? This isn't racing. This isn't short track racing. This is a demolition derby, and ultimately, there's going to be no consequences that come out of this. The one thing I hate, and I saw it on social after this race, are people like, yeah, well, there's a spot at the playoffs here, and that's why guys race like this. All right, I get it. But at the same time, you have to look at your owner and be like, hey, man, trash this race car for a, eventual P13 finish here, all for nothing. And now, don't get me wrong, most of these people are bringing sponsors. They bought their seats, so the team owner doesn't care. Like, it's coming out of the budget that you brought, so whatever. But ultimately, it's frustrating to watch the level of driving standards go down to where it's at. Even Justin Allgaier got out of the car after the race and he's like, what are we even doing here? Friday night in the truck race, Lane Riggs said he hates Martinsville at a national level just because of the type of racing it's turned into. And hey, maybe there's a reason the Xfinity Series didn't race at Martinsville from basically like 2020 to 1996, 1995, I think was the gap there. One time in 2006, and everybody at one Daytona is like, holy crap, we can't do this anymore, but this is absolute chaos around here. That race actually wasn't that bad. It was fine, especially considering the standards that we have now. But it just feels like every year we come here, whether it's in the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, one of these races always just turns into absolute madness. And don't get me wrong, Cup Series has certainly had races like this as well. The Gen 7 car makes it a little bit more difficult, but what we saw on Saturday was just perplexing at times. The best cars ended up not winning. The Carson Kvapil and Connor Zilisch, Taylor Gray, those are probably your 3 best cars most of the day. Austin Hill ends up picking up the win, his 2nd win of the year. And afterwards, he gets out and he's like, yeah, I did what I had to do there. And I hate that excuse. I hate it so much because you don't have to do that. You don't have to drive through the cars in front of you. Sometimes a P5 finish is just where you belong. But because there's no consequences to just absolutely bowling ball your way through all these pins in front of you, then you end up in situations like this. Which brings me to my next point. Should there be penalties for rough driving, avoidable contact on short tracks? Denny Hamlin advocated for that on Saturday night. And honestly, there should be. And I know people are going to be like, well, it's going to be over officiated. They're not going to be able to do this. It's balls and strikes. Some people are going to get it. Some people aren't. I understand that. But if the car store can figure it out, NASCAR can certainly figure it out as well. The problem is, people are going to tune in because this is entertainment, right? People want to see the chaos here. I don't know if more people want to see the chaos versus people that don't want to see the chaos, but there's certainly a lot of disgusted people after this race, and it's embarrassing at the same time. So yeah, I think there needs to be penalties for rough driving, for avoidable contact like this. NASCAR used to hand them out back in the 90s and the early 2000s. They'll randomly hand them out now still. Lane Riggs last year in the Truck Series got one. Carson Hocevar, I believe, has got one as well, but it's something that needs to happen more often, or at the very least, go to the back of the line for the next restart. If you cause the caution, guess what? See ya, going back. And then you kind of, take the chance of them just doing the same thing and just plowing their way through the field again, like they're the Killdozer, which coincidentally enough, Sammy Smith was born on the same day that the Killdozer event happened out in Granby, Colorado. So maybe he's got that in his DNA because he certainly showed a little bit of that on Saturday. But I think there should be some sort of penalty, right? I'm not saying, take the race win away. Maybe if it's egregious enough, we saw Austin Dillon get that last year at Richmond, kept the race win, got his playoff eligibility taken away, which is arguably way worse than the win being taken away. So yeah, I think there has to be something because right now there's no consequences to any of the actions that they're doing on the racetrack. And what's to stop you from just doing what they did again, just plowing your way through? Because that's ultimately not racing at the end of the day. That's Bowman Gray shit. And if you want to have that, like, that's totally fine. Let's go ahead and establish that that's just what's going to happen here so that everybody doesn't get up in arms. They're just like, yeah, that's what this is. But at the same time, I understand the complexity of this. NASCAR, on their side of things, is like, hey, police yourselves. The garage area needs to police itself a little bit. It's also an entertainment aspect. So I get them being like, well, we don't want to neuter this and turn it into, New Hampshire 2000 and have Jeff Burton go out there and lead every single lap because everybody's scared. At the same time, that wasn't why Jeff Burton won the race. They put restricted plates on the tracks for Loudon that year. I'm just saying that, like, it was very uneventful. That they don't want to have an uneventful short track. Let me clarify that real quick. At the same time, the drivers are going, you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile every single time. And I think at some point you need to set that boundary for them. And you need to start penalizing people because then that's going to make them scared, right? Like, you do it a couple times, they're going to be like, all right, got it. We can't risk taking a really bad point stay here for doing something stupid. So it's a real, you got to balance it. You got to weigh it out and see if it makes sense or not. I'm not saying that it needs to be, this overtop officiated, V8 supercars, Formula One style, IMSA type of thing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you go into the corner and you drive through the car in front of you and you cause a caution, you just get sent to the back of the line. I think that's probably the simplest answer here. And I think that's an acceptable answer because there should be rules for certain things like that. Like in the NFL, you can't just commit pass interference without a flag being thrown, unless, of course, you're certain teams. But that's neither here nor there. I think the same thing applies here. You need penalties in a situation like this because if not, then the inmates are running the asylum and it turns into what we saw on Saturday. And there's certainly a place for that in motorsports. I'm just not sure if there's a place for that at the national level of motorsports. So we'll see if anything comes out of it, but just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth at the end of the day because it's like, what are we even doing here right now? This is not racing. This is a demolition derby. And if you want to do that, your county fair has a ton of opportunities for you to do that. Go buy an old Crown Vic, call up Cletus, go down there and do that because we're here to watch racing at the end of the day. And to me, that's what we saw wasn't racing. It's not broken all the way. It can certainly be fixed. I just don't necessarily want to see that every single time we head to a short track. Now we head to Bristol, and thankfully it's not like Martinsville in terms of the amount of times you're going to run in the back of somebody, but I think we're certainly going to see some payback when we get to Bristol in 2 weeks' time. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the race and whether or not we should penalize people or not for rough driving. Like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on TikTok at BreakHard, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at BreakHardBlog.